Okay, so I think we're gonna get started. I know people are still joining online, as some people will be coming in, but I want to leave as much time as possible for discussion. As you know, today we're here to talk about research support services. So anyone who has had a grant knows how important this is for making things run efficiently, but also for compliance, making sure we don't overspend. And so this is all about how do we make that process better. And so we have Lisa Silbernagel, who's the director of RSS, and then Deanna Ainsworth, your title.
Grant and Strategic Alliances Manager.
There you go. I like that one.
Catch it.
I like that.
Explain it a little bit.
So they're going to present for about 30 minutes. There are a lot of changes that are going to be coming in terms of the infrastructure and software that we use for host awards. They'll introduce that. That is still very dynamic, as I understand. So there's a lot of changes that are going to be happening, which will impact how we interact with a lot of the things that we do once we have a brain. I will also manage the chat online. I sent out an email beforehand, so faculty that weren't able to attend have been sending me comments in terms of their experiences with host awards, where they have seen problems, and some suggestions for leaders moving forward. So once we get to the discussion, I could talk a little bit about that. Lisa, go ahead and review.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I'm going to elaborate just a little bit on Perry just mentioned. So basically, this is kind of what I've laid out to talk about today. As he mentioned, ask me want to leave time, probably at the end if possible, for Q&A. I would love to take those as we go along, but I do want to just make sure we've got enough time to get through everything as well. So we'll talk very briefly kind of about why RSS was created. So I guess research sits in the Division of Research and Innovation now. It's kind of a sister office to OSRA, if you will. Some of that might be repeat information, so I'm just going to kind of sit on that fairly briefly. Kind of dive in then to a little bit about, okay, so what that means. So we're RSS. Well, who really are we? And what really do we do? And that's kind of going to be the meat and potatoes, I think, of a lot of what we talk about. We came on board, or were created in the fall of 24. So it's been just a little bit. Some people may have had some information about the office and why it was created, etc. So I did want to at least give some updates, kind of talk about like what we've been doing for the last 14 months and some of the changes that have been put in place. And then, of course, pivoting to the future, what's coming up next. So, and the general plan. This I'll just speak over just really quickly. Some of you may have seen this before, but maybe just to kind of give some foundational context for what I just described about RSS even being established. So it really came out of some consultant recommendations. If this is a consultant that works with orphan institutions all over the country, and really they recommended that we create RSS for a number of reasons. But some of the big points and kind of the big takeaways from those recommendations are what you see here. We now have a team, because we fit in the Division of Research and Innovation fully, that is 100% dedicated to research administration. So when we were created, we did pull some of the personnel from what was the Division of Finance and Administration. And Dana and I came from DFA to tell you that when we were wearing our old hats, we were partly dedicated to research administration, but certainly not fully. We managed foundation and some of the programs that were better. So that was a piece of it. Some of it is just really about getting kind of the infrastructure, the institutional infrastructure in place as we get ready to head into Workday, which is our new software system. We'll touch on that a little bit more in these slides. And then, of course, prosperity widely shared, just really trying to be prepared for that. Really makes better coordination between the service delivery teams. In other words, who does kind of the day-to-day work, so to speak, and then kind of the administrative aspects of the administrative teams. And then finally, really just trying to make sure that we have consistent training, we have consistent professional development, upskilling any place where there needs to be upskilling, but just making sure that we have a team that is not just dedicated to consistent inspiration, but has the experience and the expertise around that. Okay, so your RSS team. So, Dana and I, we can see the box for either one of us. RSS is kind of divided into pods, if you will. I don't know why we chose pods. You can call them teams, whatever you might want to call them. We've just gone with pods. So there's three pods that kind of divide up campus. Nate and I have oversight over one of those three pods. College of Health is one of the college units in that pod. And then you can see on the far right, we also support College of Science, Veterinary Medicine, Education, Engineering, Liberal Arts, and Pharmacy. That probably sounds like a lot, and I'm not saying that it's not, but you'll see in the next slide where there's kind of a visual. We really are relatively evenly divided, those three pods. And then, in addition to Dana and myself, you have two individuals that are your go-to people, so to speak. So your College of Health contacts. The first one I'll mention is Michelle Jones, and she handles all the College of Health units except for any of the extension. And then, in addition to Michelle, then we have Tina. And while she is completely devoted to extension, including the extension in the College of Health, she also supports, I always want to call it extension proper. So it's the division of extension and engagement. So that is her portfolio. So in terms of College of Health support, I haven't looked at the hard numbers for a while. I would probably say Tina's maybe about 0.2 dedicated to the extension unit here embedded in this college. So really that's about 1.2 FTE that's in addition to a piece of being, if you will, that is dedicated to the College of Health. I got a little notation kind of there on the side. You see the little gray box. And I don't want to belabor this point because I don't want to appear as though I'm saying, we have some FTE shortfalls that is, not something that we're able to work through because we're certainly trying to work through them. But I do also want to call out one of the other things that was noted in the Buron recommendation was you should have an FTE for about every 7 to 11 million in your portfolio. And for the College of Health, based on FY25, that would be, as you can see there, I'm an accountant by trade, so you can see I get really channel down to the decimal point. It's the 2.16 to 3.39 FTE. So I just want to point that out only to say as much as I absolutely want to support you to the absolute fullest that we possibly can, I do also want to I'm a realist too. And so that is just a constraint that we are faced with. Okay, so this really is just a visual of what I just said. So you can see across the three orange boxes that report to the EDP Jennifer Creighton. So that's myself, Cheryl Howland, and Linda Ruggiera. We have a rather unconventional structure, and then each of us we're three co-directors. It's actually worked out very, very well. But you can see the far right sign there is our pod. So myself, Dana, and then the full staff under there. The only addition, it's been pretty recent, that's not reflected here is one buyer position. So we actually have an additional position in our pod to support purchasing activity. Okay, so here's where I want to focus on my time. What I suspect might be where a lot of the questions you all might have would kind of land. So I tried to kind of visually represent kind of who does what. So on the far left of the screen there, you see kind of the Osram bubble, if you will. And when it says OAR, that stands for Organizational Authorized Representative. That's an actual term in research administration, and just really recognizes that they have that, for example, the contractual authority. They are the ones that sign off on our agreement, so they have the ability to enter into an agreement and execute on behalf of the university. I do not have that. That is something that lives in the Osram. So they're doing, I will speak verbatim on every single point there, but you think about it, that they're doing a contract negotiation, they're setting up the awards, any outward facing communications with the sponsor. So that we'll get to that in just a second. There's intentional overlap on my visual here. Ultimately, they're the policy owner, they're the compliance enforcement, they handle the cash. So they do the billing out to the sponsor, they get the cash in the door, they record the cash. They are the final vinyl is kind of a keyword there. Voice in terms of making determinations about whether something's allowable. And then for also audit. I've got on the very bottom in each of these, you'll notice that says liaison with, and it notes another thing that in the asterisk. So that's what I'm trying to get to with the overlap, and I'll get to that in just a second. And then in the RSS circle there, what you see is what's really intended to be your first and primary contact. So even if ultimately you need to be directed to another unit, I would say reach out to RSS first. We can help you, even if it's something that ultimately, for example, needs to go out to a sponsor. We can help you kind of gather all the documents, all the justification, all the information that sponsor is going to need, kind of package it up, make sure kind of dot the I's, cross the T's, so to speak, and then pass that on to Ainsworth for them to then get on that into sponsor. So, and financial reporting, that's one thing I missed saying in Ainsworth. So the key distinguishing piece there is we're doing the financial reporting for all of you. So one of our primary responsibilities is to help you know where you stand financially on your awards. Ainsworth does the external financial reporting. So they're doing the reporting that actually goes out to the sponsoring agencies. And so along with that, if you think about kind of the operational pieces that go along with that, then you monitor the cost share, make sure that that's being met or at least it's on track to be met. We are making any correction entries for you. So if you will identify that something's posted to your grant and it should not have, or conversely, if you know that you've got an expense that should have posted to your grant and it did not, you can be the ones to communicate that to, then we can make the corrections so that the is correct. Also doing financial projections. So again, when we talk about financial reporting, it's a combination of kind of a snapshot in time. This is where you stand today, but then also your grant ends in 10 months. This is where, based on the trajectory and based on what we know now, this is where you will land. It's important that we have communication around that, though, because and I think Daniel will get to this a little bit in our piece of the presentation. There are some things we don't have visibility into everything. We have visibility into what is in the system, or then they kind of earmark and covers whatever words you are used there. If there's something that hasn't even gotten that far, like you're going to make a big purchase in a month, that's where that communication comes in. So you can fold that into the projections. The operational closeouts, that just means, again, kind of just making sure that a lot of the expenses are finalized, that we've got payroll redirected to, because I can't say only award once a day, obviously. So we're going to help you redirect that payroll. All of those kinds of operational steps to get the award actually ready to be fully closed. Ainsworth does the actual closing, but they rely on us to kind of take care of all those little pieces. So, large research purchases, you heard me talk about, we have somebody on board now that's able to help with buying. So that's something that is kind of in our service portfolio. And then the last but not least on our lane is liaison. You'll notice the double arrows. That's what I'm meaning to say. Sometimes there's going to be some overlap, and part of our job will be liaisoning with Ainsworth on your behalf. Or conversely, it'll get to the FSS lane in just a second. Liaisoning with FSS on your behalf. And then finally, I'll go over this fairly brief. So you might have heard me mention that Dana and I came over from the Division of Finance and Administration. We were both that time working in financial strategic services. The FSS team is still intact. They're absolutely still your primary point of contact for non-grant activity. So they're your E&G operational contact, any non-financial reporting related to EUG. Again, we'll see the underlying thing, which is CNG non-research. So they're still doing regular distributions, they're still doing corrections, they're still doing their financial projections on non-research funding. So if you've got activity that's not related to a sponsored award, they are absolutely able to keep that. And then what I've got there, as I mentioned in the asterisks, is just really kind of explain those overlap and the difference. I know some things, so we'll take prior approval act, for example, because we see kind of forgotten how big things are and overlay and RSS. And if you need to do some kind of action, you have some project change or some activity that is kind of outside of the parameters of the terms and conditions that we award. and that can vary widely depending on what kind of award you have. Our job is to help you you've heard me say, dot the I's and cross the T's. We're there to make sure that we can provide a good project need for it, your justification that he's from the sponsor, really making sure that you got that, you've got the rotation, that we're doing it hopefully proactively. That's the word, prior approval. But again, just kind of packaging that up, knowing that Osrodale is going to do that on your behalf in terms of actually sending that to the sponsor for approval. So that's where there's some collaboration and some overlap, but we absolutely did do a primary file. And then likewise, the overlap between the RSS lead and the FS lead as they're learning. Obviously, knowing sometimes, so corrections, for example, you've heard me talk about, if you see something on your grant that shouldn't belong there, we're your go-to for doing corrections. We are going to communicate with FSS and make sure that we're basically on the same page, that we're working together on that. Because obviously, if we've got activity that's crossing funding, so it's crossing between research and D&D, for example, it's going to affect that too. We want to make sure that we're keeping in with it. So I know I said I'll wait till questions till the end, but I just want to pause, just to make sure I haven't, there's nothing I've completely glossed over that you need, or the thing that you think, I think you're going great and really stagnant. Okay. All right. Amy, anything you just really need me to kind of touch on, just doesn't make sense here. Okay, so here we're getting to the kind of what had we been doing since we've been RSS, and then we'll still pivot to the future a little bit. So you heard me say that we've moved people in from the Division of Finance and Administration. So we moved people in campus-wide. Every academic college on campus, as well as some of the non-academic units. And of course, when we were in that situation, you have people that have done things, even if they kind of done the similar functions, sometimes they've done it different ways, they get different operating procedures. So the very first thing we worked on was making sure that every unit on campus had a go-to contact. We actually had a couple of units, actually a couple on campus, that did not have anybody devoted to research administration. So we needed to make sure that everybody had a representative in RSS. Then we worked on standardizing the financial reporting, the internal financial reporting, making sure that we had a product for our PIs that was going to be, you heard me mention it earlier, both of thorough representation of where we are right now, but also they could do a solid projection for where you're going to be by the time you orient. So we now have a standard financial report that is being used across RSS. Cost share monitoring, award closeout, labor changes, and PO closings. Those are all things that we've worked on. I don't know if you can tell there, though. I highlighted a few, but the first two that I'd already mentioned, and also labor changes, because I think those are, it's kind of, here's some of the bigger pieces, if you will. A lot of our questions come in around those. So we just finished a standard operating procedure for labor changes as well. So that's being rolled out. And then I've got a slide down there, kind of taking a little forward. So the Workday is what I mentioned when we first came on. So when you might have heard it called AMP, which stands for Administrative Modernization Program. But it is really, Workday is the product. It's the name of the product that you purchased. And post-award administration is going to be rolled into that, as well as, so for example, payables, what else? Purchasing,
Penny hire, Penny buy, Penny hire,
all in all, payroll, and
all of these things are moving into Workday.
So it's very broad. So it's not just post-award administration, but obviously what I'm going to speak to today is around post-award. One big, as with any brand new system, there's some things we're really excited about, and there's things that we're thinking, we'll have to see how this plays out. The one thing I am very excited about is what we see in the first bullet point there. It will, in my opinion, significantly increase visibility. I have not seen a demo on everything, but we actually had some demos just this week, and one of the questions that was asked is, well, what will the PI see? And it sounds like you all will be able to see significantly more than you are seeing now. So it should definitely increase visibility. not just into kind of like where things are in the process. So, for example, you'll get something in your queue, so to speak, if a new award is made or an amendment on an award has been. But also, you'll be able to see where things are in the process. So, the change being made or friction being made is going to be, again, I haven't seen a demo of everything, so I want to be a little careful, but my understanding that your visibility is significant. Cost share information will now be, as you know, if you've had an award with cost share, you typically have, all you current language, you have an index for your sponsored project, and then you'll have an index that represents the cost share commitment. So any institutional match is getting posted to the cost share. In the future state, you'll have different award lines for a given grant, and the cost share will be included in that. So you'll kind of see the big picture in totality. And then here's the other thing that I hope you'll be excited about. Labor chief, and immediately you might be just you're optimistic only because there will be, from what I understand, a still small sliver of time in which there'll be a lockout, but nothing like what we have now. The labor changes will be posting, if not immediately, very quickly. So it's significantly improved in that regard. So as you know, right now, you've got two times a month where they post. So you can make a change to jogging, the 5th of the month, and you won't see that till like the 16th or 17th. So that's no longer going to be the case. So I think that's going to be very helpful now. I will, in complete honesty, the labor changes for retroactive, we're working with some of our team that's more involved in kind of the configuration of AMP about this. Because right now, the retroactive ones do appear to be challenging. Labor intensive, more so than I would have anticipated. So more to come on that. I'm hoping that's not the final, but just be aware. Overall, I think there's more positives than negatives. Consistent service improvement. Okay, so in addition to what we've already done, we're looking at developing standard operating procedures for a number of things. Project rebudgeting, participant support, unreimbursed costs. So that was one of the ones I wanted to highlight. Again, I'm going to try and go just a little bit quick in the interest of time, but I wanted to spend some time there because, believe it or not, we've never had a standard operating procedure for where we have a project cost that is unreimbursable. So that includes things that are actually unallowable, as well as things that post, even if they're valid. Timeliness becomes an issue. If we're at the end of an award and that expense posts too late for Osler to include it in the final invoice, we're not going to get reimbursed for it. And then, of course, just project overruns as well. So it's a mixed bag in terms of what can cause that. But we've never had a standard operating procedure in terms of what the communication looks like. So again, if it can't be charged to the award or reimbursed by the sponsors, maybe the better way to say it, there's going to have to be another funding source to absorb that. So that's where the communication is critical, as you all would know. So working on that. And then some of this on the Workday piece you've heard me say, so you'll have better visibility in financials. So right now, I feel like we've got a million is obviously an exaggeration, but we have way too many separate systems, some of which do not talk to each other. So that is going to be significantly remedied, I think, with Workday. You won't need to go into verbs or core because you should have that access to that information within Workday. And then finally, just a note, awards without automatic carryover will be here to follow. So you heard me talk about award lines and how it's captured and kind of together with the cost share. The same with those awards where you have a year 1 and a year 2 and a year 3 and can't bring forward. So that's going to be an improvement as well. And then I'll go over pretty quickly, but they've been just some of the other efforts we've been working on since RSS was created. Really working on training our staff. So they all went through mandatory training last spring. Pretty significant, extensive training in the various aspects of research administration. And then also we've been focused from a compliance perspective. And when I say I'm talking about collectively across campus, a pretty significant backlog in an uncertified effort report. So that was cited as a risk, which it obviously is. So we have now managed to get a lot of those certifications, and we're back to calendar year 2021, which was the first year that we were we were presented with as a compliance risk. We've just kind of been working backwards. And then we brought some things. I know this probably isn't all that relevant for this particular college, but things like Ag Research Foundation and capacity funding into the RSO oversight. And then the other box is just kind of what I've already alluded to. We've been working on getting ready for Workday, managing what really has been a crazy year in terms of federal landscape. I mean, that goes without saying. And then also really working in collaboration with Haas around some policy work. Okay, PI engagement. So this is really, I never have heard me say this before. Like, I know I'm probably a broken record, but I feel passionately about this. This is where so much can go right. When we have meetings with the PI, and I'll just share, Dana's going to talk a little bit more about that. That is our expectation. So I do want to be clear. Of course, I talked about, our FP retail and years and all of that. We are both committed to seeing this happen. What we're asking for, both of all of you and our staff, is a minimum of a half-hour per quarter. If you need more, we absolutely can work. I know some of you have pretty complex portfolios. A half-hour quarter might not be enough, but at a minimum, there's at least a touch point. I personally think of best practices as we close out, maybe 120 days ahead of the expiration date. We bump that up to about a month or every month. Because again, that's our last window of time to make sure everything's posted correctly, that we don't have any other outstanding issues, or even something as simple as to reduce the no conflict extension. That's not too early to start talking about that. But in that meeting, so the part of that would be going over that financial report that I mentioned before, so that it's a very comprehensive report. Going over that, and then, like I said, not just going through that, making sure it's all accurate from your perspective, that we don't have anything charged that shouldn't be, or we're not missing anything, but also then doing those projections. This is where the trajectory would lead you. And then proactive guidance and problem solving. And I will be the first to say, I feel like we collectively are way more reactive than we would like to be. Certainly, in an ideal world, we would far rather be helping you get ahead of something than problem solving after the fact. Is it reality right now? I'd love to say otherwise, but I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. That is the goal. We need to get to the point where we are proactively providing that. So by risk mitigation and compliance assurance, I mentioned that this is where we might see something that you might not even recognize as a potential risk, but we might be able to say, here's something that looks like it might have the potential to be an issue, perhaps even a disallowance or something like that. So help us work through that with you. But that's, for example, gathering some documentation or some justification for something that would be allowable but might appear in those cases. That were fear like might be unallowable, or just anything that we think might put the university at risk in anything. So that's what I feel like our job is. Again, I would love to say we're absolutely proactive 100% of the time. I can tell you that. I would love to say it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat what I do wish was the case. But that absolutely is what I really feel like is best practice and it's the goal. And then we have some information on best practices for PIs, and I'm going to turn it over to Dana for.
I'm going to talk for a little while. Dana Ainsworth, it's really nice to see so many people here. I know we haven't interacted before, but I just want to give you a little bit of background on my experience here at OSU. I've been here for almost 18 years. The first 14 of that was working as a research accountant for the College of Engineering, with supporting specifically the portfolio of civil construction engineering. So I did this, what is now the RSS role, back when we were in business centers for years. Along the way, I picked up some supervisory responsibilities, then moved into management. I spent the last 3 years of the financial department for the College of Engineering. Was thrilled when I had the opportunity to come back to Swift. I'm very passionate about this role. So while I haven't interacted with you before, I had to really pick up the strategic alliance portion of my position. Mostly to make sure we get the service did. So in my years of experience working with faculty, these are definitely some of the core things. I think everything is interrelated here. communication, including in all things. Lisa mentioned how we are trying to be more proactive. I think that when I was with engineering, we were embedded within our units. So that communication, that interaction happened daily. I knew my faculty, I knew the students. So I was able to have a bit more intellectual curiosity about some of the things that were going on the grants that I saw. But this needs to be mirrored with you and you as PIs with your own grants. We want you to be able to see things and communicate with us, communicate with FSS. It has to do with the NG funds, and there's interplay between your unit contacts. We can support moving effort, adjusting labor. We don't do hiring. We don't do termination. So I need to hire someone. You need to make sure that communication with the unit contact is happening. And also when they're no longer working for you and they're out of system, so you're not still paying. Monitoring grant activity. Yes, this is the key component of what we do, but you have insight into your grants that sometimes we don't have. You currently have yours. Everyone with an active operations has access to your system. It's not perfect, but it gives you, at the very least, a snapshot of your budget. You can see encumbrances. If you are paying a student and there's no encumbrances, that's a concern. So you would let us know. First and four are not going to be operational after okay. Some of us are nervous about this because we're so used to the way the system works. At the very least, we can go into GERS and send you a report once a month saying, hey, here's a list of all your active grants. I was reviewing them and I noticed this, that, or the other. Let's talk about this. We need to move your student, your grant ends. That's the start of a conversation. But by you also saying things like that, that helps us to initiate action. So kind of a two-way step. Knowing your budget and your spending is also fairly critical. Knowing what your budget constraints are. You're ultimately the fund financial managers of the REAP grant. We will help and we'll be curiosities if things come up that we don't think are correct. But we definitely need you to kind of understand the budget that was proposed and approved by the sponsor and spend within that framework. Also knowing your constraints of the end dates, your time management is pretty key. We will try, as Lisa said, our expectation is that as we're approaching closeout, we would reach out, start talking about things that need to happen to end that award. If things are still continuing, we can help you initiate extensions. We don't like to do those within 30 days of end date. We like to be proactive and get that process started. And we do need to extend a little. The other thing that's part of your budget, subawards, participant support, and equipment. Those are really tricky categories. If you want to buy equipment and it's not in your proposal, we're going to need to ask permission. It's not something that we can do automatically. Workday is going to have some constraints built into it where we're not allowed to spend in specific categories that don't have budget. So we will need to be more proactive and make sure we make those corrections before we get to that point. Another thing I want to point out, and this also ties into conducting timely approvals, we have the Concur system now. It's not going away. We will continue to have that with Workday. One of the things that we've noticed a lot in our roles is that whether you're using your own, using Concur for your own travel, your own expense purchasing, or your students are using it, charging things to grants, some things really matter in the mechanism of Concur when you're selecting what your spend category is. For example, if a student is buying something for a project and he or she think it's appropriate to select student project supplies, well, that might not be the most accurate. It translates to account codes in the system. So just being mindful of things like that and also approving those timely because Concur does not encumber. Even when you put through a travel request, that doesn't refund your funds. These are the kind of things from the expenses that are missing that we may not know about. Until those expense reports are reconciled, those charges will not appear on your spending. For reporting, currently we have the personnel activity reports or PAR forms that come out quarterly. That system is going to be wrapped up into Workday. You'll have a lot more opportunity to do reviews timely. Sometimes the way the system currently works, they're sent to us. The intention is that we give them a preliminary review and then send them out to you to review and you sign. You download them and upload them. It's a bit of a clunky process, but absolutely necessary. I've always found that PAR forms are it's where you identify that there's effort be done on projects. If there is a student that is not working for you anymore, that's where we identify that. If there is an A index that is now a B index, you need to actually make those changes. And par effort certifications and where you are really critical to get this done to help you as well. I put in awareness of policy and procedure. I would not expect you to know all financial policies that we have. They're continually changing. Where to even find them is a bit of an enigma these days. But just knowing that there are certain things you can and cannot put on a grant, understanding the procedure, like if you want to purchase something, how do you do it? And I say this with the intention that in the next 5.5 months, this is all going to be reset for us and for you as well. So we're going to be learning the process simultaneously. I think it's definitely incumbent on us to kind of figure out all of those things and make sure it's communicated. Escalate concerns and ask questions. If there's something that doesn't seem right, reach out. If you've reached out and you're not getting an answer, escalate. I currently support Michelle. I've supervised Michelle and Tina, and I don't know if there are issues unless I hear shared issues. It is my goal to help everyone in this situation. I want to make sure that they're being the best they can be and giving the best support. But I need to know what issues need to be escalated and what training could be provided. And let's see. Oh, well, maybe you should talk about those.
So I'll touch on this really quickly because this is the last slide before we open to questions. I want to give you some time. But just to give you some idea, some of the things that, so we created RSS and we said, this is why we're doing it. This is what we do. This is how we're going to do it. Then, of course, that begs the question, are you meeting your own measurements? So I have a laundry list of other efforts I'd like to track, but we're going to start with what we think we can. We didn't want to bite off more than we could chew. That's the other thing. So we started with these four. So we are tracking and have been tracking for some time awards when they have currently no expenses plus certificate at all. So we do have some of those instances, and 1 year that it always kind of begs the question is what's happening. But if it's a brand new award. And it doesn't expire for 1 year, then obviously we talk about why that might be. But in 30 days, that's why we're breaking it out that way. That's a bigger issue. We have 30 days plus a little bit of time after we go back, but it's literally not very much time to see what's going on and get expenses posted. And there should be where unspent funds that close out. Now, I will be the first to tell you there are projects that come in under budget. I'm not advocating that we that we spend to spend, but I am saying we want to make sure that, again, we don't have something posted elsewhere. It is a perfectly valid, legitimate expense on the grant, because we do want to utilize every rent cent, for actual valid project expenses that we can. So we're tracking that. We're also tracking cost overruns and then cost transfer. So anytime we're moving expenses on or off a project. And then, as I said, there's a whole host I can add to this. I'm planning to at some point, but right now this is kind of was a starting. Kind of, like I said, monitor our own book all these some lead. We have a dashboard. All on the dashboard. So we're tracking every single month, and we're walking. In some cases, progress. In some cases, I think we've got some standard metrics that we need to push them a little bit more. We can start. And then, I'm going to open it up all of you.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. Okay.